The Commission Files. Hello and welcome to The Commission Files. I'm Will Leitch.
And I'm Kerry Greig. We're coming to you from Studio 2 at the Commission Broadcast Centre in Dundonald, Northern Ireland.
Last time Kerry and I were with you as the dynamic duo that we are, we were looking at the cost of living crisis. And we brought you 3 compelling interviews with people doing a lot to help. People from Christians Against Poverty, St Vincent de Paul and the Trussell Trust.
Let's remind ourselves for a moment what they said. Here's Jackie Robb from CAP telling us the story of a visit to bring groceries to a woman who'd been cautioned by the police in a supermarket for stealing. The police officer involved had understood there were deeper issues behind her actions.
As I sat in her kitchen and watched her unpack the bags, she was putting the shopping into completely empty cupboards. There wasn't one tin of beans, there wasn't one tin of soup in her cupboards. So what we'd brought her that day was basically all she had. Her back was against the wall. She was forced to go and steal food because she didn't have anything in her house to feed the kids.
Mary Wade from St Vincent de Paul didn't want to talk politics, but she told us she does want good governance. Big topic just now.
It would make our job easier if Stormont was up and running and all the systems that should be in place there were in place. That would make our job easier. I obviously am not a politician. I don't know the intricacies of government, but I do know we need government.
And from the Trussell Trust, Jenny Thompson, who gave us her thoughts on the church's role when there are people in need.
Our food bank was birthed out of probably a holy discontent in the lack of the desire of churches in our local area to support people through these crises. We are a Christian charity. It's who we are and what we do, why we do what we do. But I think sometimes there can be that stigma with a church that they are really only out to proselytise and shove God down their throat. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to change that.
All of those 3 groups making a big difference. But is it enough? They all have dreams of things being better, and that got Kerry and me thinking, didn't it, Kerry? It's great to help people, but should Christians be giving a Bible-based vision for the society they want, trying to make a positive contribution to the debate society's having about how to help the vulnerable, the lonely, the people who can't make ends meet? It was Christians who did that in the past, after all, Christians with vision. They helped abolish slavery, promote education, or reform the criminal justice system.
There are groups who have been trying to talk to government, such as the Cliff Edge Coalition. That's a collection of more than 100 organisations warning government about changes to the welfare system. And there's the Coalition of Christian Voices Against Poverty in Northern Ireland.
Well, as we researched all this, Kerry and I came across a document called Reimagine, written last year by Daniel McElhinney of the Evangelical Alliance here in Northern Ireland. It outlines the kind of society Christians want, whilst being realistic and aware that many people do not have faith or come from other faiths, and that society is made up of communities, themselves made up of all sorts of groups and cultures.
We went straight to the source and invited Danielle McElhinney to Studio 2 here, along with the Reverend Brian Anderson. Brian's the superintendent of East Belfast Mission, rooted in its community. He's a Methodist minister, a former president of the Methodist Church in Ireland, and a former president of the Irish Council of Churches.
Daniel and Brian both think a lot about our society, how it could be, and the part Christians could play in it. Kerry, I know you were gutted because you couldn't be there the day they both dropped into commission here.
I was.
Well, we certainly missed you, but we did have a good chat. And I started by asking them both if they feel that everyone in our society is just a bit gloomy and fed up these days.
Yeah, so I think as we look around in society today, especially across Northern Ireland, we can just see people that are just, that word despondent, despairing, just a little bit tired of what they're seeing in politics, tired of the constant friction that we hear sort of in media and in culture. I think people have just had enough. I think people... during COVID, we had that opportunity to kind of become a little bit insular and sit inward and, stay at home. And I don't know that people have fully come out of that again, because they think when they look out and they see just how depressing some things are, they don't want to go out and be a part of it.
Do you find the same thing, Brian?
Yeah, I think there's levels and layers of it. I think the cynicism you refer to are probably those who can afford to be cynical, those who, are frustrated by the lack of political development, are frustrated by the cost of living, but they can probably absorb it. I think where I see the greatest despair is amongst the communities that can't absorb it, that it's a mental health problem of years of struggling to make ends meet, struggling with the day-to-day routine. I have to say, in my setting, I watch the women who keep the families together with such admiration, because they have to hold children and school, the budget, getting the food in, is there enough electricity? So theirs is a very real despondency. It's a daily grind. Whereas, as I said earlier, those of us who are middle class, well off in those terms, it's a cynicism that comes from, we wish it to be better. But those who can make it better don't seem to be in the place where all their issues are solved enough for them to make it better.
I think it's fair to say a lot of people think to themselves, well, somebody should do something. Something should be done about this. It's the translating that to who does it, and I think that's probably what we're going to talk about a great deal. I'll stay with you for a second, Brian, if I may. The cost of living you referred to, the crisis, how much has that changed, have you noticed, in the last however long?
There's a lack of money. It's a fundamental issue. There's just not enough money coming into people's pockets. We talk about the social security system. I'm sorry, but there's not enough security in the system. The Trussell Trust, who I know you've had on your podcast, talk about enough money for the essentials and how it almost needs to go up by 50%, whether you're single or whether you're a family. But equally, the cost of electricity, the cost of food, the inflation rate around food is higher than the national rate of 6 or 7%. So the stress that families are under, we need to get more money into people's pockets who are the most vulnerable. I am very frustrated with a society that makes those who are vulnerable more vulnerable. We're talking about cuts in the benefit system, in the local authority system. We're not talking about an increase of a penny in income tax to those who could probably afford it. I get very frustrated with that political mindset. We don't seem to be asking that question. We seem to be wanting to create a society that hits the most vulnerable, and they can't afford it. So that's a frustration.
You referred back to when we heard from Christians Against Poverty, from the Trussell Trust, from St Vincent de Paul in the last episode when we looked at cost of living, and they talked about the growth in demand for their services and the growth in need and the growth in difficulty. Danielle, you with Evangelical Alliance have written a document, Reimagine,
Yes.
which kind of says, look, this is the society we would like. This is how we would love it to be. That clearly, that vision couldn't be more different than the society that Brian's just outlined there.
Yes, so in Reimagine, we wanted to really take a hold of the realities of what are going on. We don't want to avoid them. We don't want to look away from them. But we wanted to look towards, well, what is the Christian vision? What is our hopeful vision? What is good news? And how does it speak into actually what Brian has just described? Where can we bring the solutions? Where can Christians actually be the people that have something to offer into that that picture that Brian has just described? Because that is the reality that some people are living with. And yet Jesus has got something to say about that. Jesus cares about those issues. Jesus cares about the fact that people are living in abstract poverty and can't afford the essentials. And so that comes down to us as the Christians, followers of Jesus, to think differently. Can we think differently? Can we have a bigger vision? Can we have a hopeful vision where we can see actual changes happening in that picture?
If you look at social media, people will tell you the church is the problem. The church is holding Northern Ireland back. You hear it all the time.
Yeah, and I think that is the media. rather than actually what we see on the ground. Because I don't know about Brian, but what I see is a church that is very much in the heart of communities, churches that are very much in the middle of where people are living, and they're the ones that are filling the gap. They're the ones that are reaching out and helping. And actually, the Evangelical Alliance did some research last year that's called Talking Jesus, and it was about how do people talk about Jesus in society today, and do they want to talk about Jesus? And what we found is that people think, non-Christians actually think that Christians are some of the most friendly, generous people that they have met. And when it comes to Northern Ireland, the stats actually go through the roof, because they really believe, people in Northern Ireland really believe that Christians are the ones that are friendly, they are generous, they are helpful, and that's what we're seeing.
Brian?
Yeah, we love, we see around posters around the city, around Northern Ireland, John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave. It didn't say just the individual. As important as individual salvation is, Jesus came to love the world. God gave his son for the world. So that, and then when Jesus was living his life out, he was involved with the mess of the world. And so I believe very strongly that Christians should be involved with the mess of the world. And that, for me, in my context and many other contexts, it's about being with those who are most vulnerable, those who are caught up in addictions, the care for the climate, all of the transformation of the world with the love of Christ and bringing that to it. The Trussell Trust food banks, the majority of them are based in churches. All of CAP's work comes out of churches. The generosity I'm seeing again and again and again comes from donations of churches. So while I take your point about the church being the problem, where we limit Jesus to a particular strand of evangelicalism, which is there, let's just name it, but where we see it broader, and Danielle and her work with Reimagine paints that picture of a gospel that is big and massive and collective of all situations and all people.
My head's bursting with things I want to ask, but I want to make one historical point. Christians have a track record in changing society, historically. And again, you cover that in Reimagine. Big changes in society that Christians have done in the past.
Yeah, so when you look to schooling and education, where did that come from? That started with Christians. When you look at things like street pastors, people who are out on the streets helping people who are there at night, that sort of nighttime economy they talk about, that all found its place and its origins in the church. When you look at things like CAP. I mean, CAP is not just a little Christian organisation helping local people. It's a UK-wide, huge organisation helping people who are in debt, seeing people freed from debt who were just under the weight of debt. So when you look at historically, you look back in time, you look throughout history, Christians have been at the centre, and that's because they care. That's because they have the heart of Christ, not just to look and say, oh, there's some poor people we can help, but actually we want to see transformation happening across our society, and that means we're going to have to get involved. We're going to have to get stuck in. We're going to have to actually move and make something happen here. And that's what I look back and see.
And yet you're going to hear, Brian, and I know you do, people saying, wait a minute, looking after society, looking after people, that's the government's job. They're the ones who get the taxes, they're the ones with the money, they're the ones with the power, they're the ones with control. And you may have people, I don't know, in official organisations or government departments saying, back off, we do this. How does that relationship even begin to work?
And that's a utopia that's probably in heaven sometime in the future. But it's never been the reality. What I appreciate at the moment is I'm in a number of coalitions to do with poverty. Some of them are church-based coalitions, but some of them are coalitions where government, public authorities, trade unions, academics are coming together and saying we want to build a better society. And here's 3 or 4 asks we would ask of the government. And I have to say, to be fair to the civil servants who are doing a lot of work at the moment, they are listening. And so I have a bit of hope, I have to say, that the voice of the church is being listened to and being sought. We used to have the public square to ourselves in Northern Ireland, but now we're one of many in the public square. And we've got to realise that. The voice of the church isn't the sole barometer, if you like, at the moment. We have to place ourselves with a multifaceted society of different beliefs and different ways of seeing the world. But we've got to take our place there and be there and advocate strongly for Jesus and the love of Christ. So yeah, it's a different world that Northern Ireland church culture has to get used to. But I do believe we are being sought.
Let's explore that relationship for a minute with executive power and with civil services and with governments and departments and all of that. I'm trying to get as many words out to get people to understand what it is I mean. I know that after Reimagine, Danielle, you wrote to all the political parties in Northern Ireland and said, please read this, what do you think of it?
Yeah.
Did they?
Some of them did. Yes, we have had an opportunity to talk to some parties, some Westminster politicians and some local politicians. So I have had an opportunity to take it to them. And when I take it to them, I have to say that it has been received really well. I think their ears prick up at something that's just a little bit more hopeful because you have to give it to them. I think they listen to a lot of complaint all day, every day. I think their ears are bent from people who just want to complain.
I don't think you have to think they do.
No, they do. They do. And I think when we came in with Reimagine, it made their ears prick up and they read it and they really loved it. They love to hear something hopeful. They love to be reminded that actually there are good things going on out there. I don't think we need to pretend that everything is good, to actually recognise that there are some good things going on out there and recognise that the church is a good force, a force for good across Northern Ireland society. And so I feel that we've been really well received. Now, would I like more to read it and to respond to it and to talk to us about it and to get involved with it? Yes, I think that's always the case. I think you always want more, but I feel like I've been well received. I feel that Reimagine has been well received. I feel like the next step comes, though, in what we can actually do with that. It's not just about being well received and sort of getting a clap or a pat on the back to say, that's really good. It's saying, right, how can we work with you then? How can we actually involve you in some of this policy shaping? How can we involve you in the conversations that we're having that are going to shape policy and shape our society moving forward?
Bran, what model might work? What have you seen elsewhere that might be a way to get those relationships to really buzz?
In 2016 and 2017, not that long ago, I was part of the church leaders group and I was president of the Irish Council of Churches. And the welfare reforms were being brought across from London into Northern Ireland. And we felt strongly as a church leaders group, so that would be the moderator of the Presbyterian Church, the Methodist president, the two archbishops and the president of ICC, that we felt this was the wrong time for this to come in. And so we went on a collaborative approach. We didn't go and say, this is wrong, and shout it from the mountaintops. We went and met. We were well informed. I think churches need to be well informed, not just a banner headline. We were well informed. We had experts who backed up the financial impact it would have in Northern Ireland, and we presented it to the various ministers. And they listened and they halted it for 3 years, and now it's at the point where it's being thought about bringing it back in together again. So it's that kind of, not a truncheon to beat your way in, but rather saying, look, we feel this is wrong for society. We don't see the love that we would want as churches being used here, so we think this should be held back. And to be fair, they did.
Now, you say they halted it. Tell me how that actually felt at the time in terms of, was there, well, hey, we got them, we stopped them? Was it, we're working in collaboration, we're working in partnership? Was it, can we keep talking so we listen to each other as the months and years go ahead? I mean, because that could have gone so many different ways.
Yeah, no, I don't. Well, we were pleased, I have to confess. It was...
Well, you wouldn't have been disappointed.
No, we weren't disappointed. We were pleased.
Not.
And I was pleased for those who worked behind the scenes. We in many ways were the figureheads, but there was a lot of people who hold public office or public, what's the phrase I'm looking for, those within the churches whose public affairs, like Danielle, they were very much giving us the information we needed. So I was pleased for them, and their hard work was recognised. It's a model I think that we've thought about. Actually, Danielle is part of a coalition and is pulling together a coalition of Christians about poverty. And it's a model we have thought about. It's something that we could do again, well informed, and trying then to say, I'm sorry I'm repeating myself, but this idea of making the vulnerable more vulnerable is anti-Christian in my opinion.
That puts an onus on you, Danielle, and people who do the kind of thing you do, to have your facts at your fingertips, to have the policy pre-written, to have the thinking done, so that when the opportunity presents itself, well, actually, here's how things look, here's what we think might help.
Yes, and I have only been in this world of poverty over the last year or so I feel like I am still learning. But yes, we've got to have our facts right. And I love what Brian was just saying there about being well informed. And that is something, it's one of the reasons why we have started this coalition. So we're calling it, it's got a bit of a name, but we're calling it the Coalition of Christian Voices Against Poverty in Northern Ireland. And we think it does what it says on the tin. But part of the reason that we're pulling Christians across the churches, across different denominations, different organisations, all with a faith, all with a Christian faith, pulling them together into this coalition so that we can, number one, share our experiences and what works well, but number two, that we can be well informed. And I have to be honest and say that sometimes I think when it comes to poverty, social security, benefits, how that all works, I don't know that the church is always very well informed. I think we're great, brilliant at meeting need and giving money and giving food, but I don't know that we always fully understand what's going on. What is the experience of people living in poverty? What are the problems with social security? And actually, what would be the solutions? So that's why we've pulled together this coalition, because we recognise that there's going to be no one church that can tackle that on their own. They don't have the time, they don't have the resources, they're actually too busy feeding hungry people and helping vulnerable people. But actually, as a coalition, we can come together, share what we know, what we understand. We've got relationships with the Cliff Edge Coalition, and they're sharing some of their expertise with us. And so we want to inform the church. We want the church to speak out and to speak up from an informed position.
I like that. I like that we have the relationship with the Cliff Edge Coalition particularly, because they reached out and said, how can we connect better with the voice of faith?
Yeah.
They reached out towards the church, and they have three particular asks, and we support all three of the asks. And now the church and the academic and the trade union world are moving forward then to make our asks known to society.
It's back to that thing that you were saying. The church has sort of had a negative reputation in the media, perhaps in the past, because we're so insular and, we have our own ideas and we want to do our own thing. Whereas, as you say, the work with the Cliff Edge Coalition, I think that's really important that we say, we're willing to learn from others. We don't think that we necessarily have all of the answers. We're willing to learn from others. And I think that kind of collaboration is working well.
You're listening to the Commission Files.
We'll be back in a moment.
She was the older sister living in poverty, but her brother lived in a palace for much of his life. She believed he would rescue her people from slavery, but she didn't know how. Then God spoke.
Moses, I am the God of your fathers. I have heard the cries of my people. I have come to rescue them and to lead them out of Egypt. Now go, you must lead my people Israel out of Egypt.
You can hear Miriam and many other Bible drama stories online at Commission's website at commissionradio.org/programs.
This is the Commission Files with Kerry, Greig and Will Leitch.
We're hearing from the Reverend Brian Anderson of East Belfast Mission and Danielle McElhinney of Evangelical Alliance. And I asked Brian about something called a Poverty Truth Commission.
It grows out of Scotland. Scotland has been very good at collaborating between government, third sector and faith when it comes to dealing with poverty. So the Poverty Truth Commission started in Glasgow and then has now developed into a Scottish Poverty Truth Commission. The basic principle is this: don't do anything for us without us. The us being those whose lived experience is poverty. And so the basic principle is you get into the room 12 people whose lived experience is poverty. And on the other side of the room, you get into those who have the means by which poverty can be alleviated. And you let them bat it around. There's creativity around it, but ultimately you want as a commission to find one or two projects, one or two problems in a particular area, and how do we solve it? So the Belfast City Council have adopted the concept of a Poverty Truth Commission, and so now the council and a few others, we're trying to see how we can form this commission and deliver it to change something within Belfast around poverty, unidentified yet.
Now, you've said Belfast twice, and instinctively I'm thinking other cities, towns in Northern Ireland are going to look at that and think, wait a minute.
Absolutely.
we would like one of those. I mean, could it be bigger? Could it be?
Yeah, I think it is important.
Across 6 counties.
Yes, of course it could. Of course it could. It is important that your local authority buys into it because they have the influence. So that precept is important. But yes, absolutely.
Danielle, we haven't mentioned a particular word yet, despite the fact we're sitting about 1.5 miles from it, and that word is stormont.
Ooh.
And let's get straight to the nitty-gritty here, because everybody who's come in here to talk about these issues has mentioned it, or indeed been asked about it. We have no stormont executive.
No.
We have as I understand it, and you can correct me, a poverty strategy that's not been implemented.
Yeah.
That's depressing, isn't it?
It is a bit, yeah. We have a poverty strategy that's been sitting on the shelf for years, really since the Good Friday Agreement. They started conversations about that, and that was a priority. But there's been sort of many permutations of it, but it's just never actually been delivered. And most recently, we know that there have been a co-design group and that they have made some great recommendations. I mean, we've read it and seen some of it. Some really great ideas there on how to tackle poverty, but ultimately it's just not been signed off and it's not been delivered. And then, of course, you ask the question, well, when will it be? Because we don't have Stormont now, we don't have an executive. When will we? And will this be at the top of the list of their priorities of things to do? So, yes, it can be a little bit depressing when you think about that, but we know that it's sitting there ready to go. We know that there's some great ideas, and so we would very much be of the opinion that when Stormont gets up and going, that we would love to see this as a priority.
Are you, from where you are coming today, Brian, allowed to have an opinion about whether Stormont should have an executive operating right now or not? Because churches panic whenever you get into politics. Very quickly people start to worry.
Yeah. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's. So Jesus seemed to say that they are joined. And so, yes, I think we should. And there are, a number of our politicians hold faith as part of their motivation for what they do. The parties are in their particular silos at the moment. We hear various signs, and you get taken up the hill, forgive the metaphor, and then you seem to get left halfway down the hill. It is frustrating, and that's back to the cynicism. And it's not good when a society is cynical about its politics to a point where the cynicism takes away any sense of hope. And that's, I fear, we're kind of at. I do hope we get across the line. When Stormont gets back up and running, will poverty be near the top of their list? Well, there'll have to be a thing for government. What do you call it? Not an agenda for government. Programme for government, where poverty sits in that. Well, that's where they'll hear from us. We think it will have to be high up, so we, with others, will make sure that they hear that it needs to be. Or
there could be an argument in the first day about what do we call the first ministers. You can't tell.
You can't tell. You can't tell. But equally, direct rule from London gives me less hope in terms of the priority of poverty. I think our local politicians live it and see it. And so a direct rule for me would be less hopeful. I was very disappointed when the Labour government said that they would not change the policy of the two to child limit.
Or the Labour Party.
Labour Party,
Yeah.
sorry, did I
Yeah.
say party? Labour Party said they weren't going to change that. That saddened my heart, and I thought, right, well, London definitely won't. Westminster isn't going to face the issues that Northern Ireland is facing. So it is. So
Well, we are where we are. You know, we have a Westminster government approaching what will be the last full year of the current term. I don't expect them to take any risks. And then at some stage, whenever it happens to be, we'll have an election. And invariably, you see not an awful lot of change straight off, whatever happens immediately after that.
So, but we'll still keep doing what we're doing well.
Exactly.
We'll not walk away. The churches will stand in the gap.
Yeah.
Because we'll ensure our love for people will ensure that we stand in that gap while we're lobbying.
Could you do a lot more if government said, I love what you're doing, I love your motivation, I love that you're doing it for anybody and everybody. Could you do a lot more if they stumped up a lot more cash to do it with? Of course you could.
Yeah, but we have models, forgive me for talking about where I work in East Belfast Mission. We have a concept called Hosford Community Housing, where a coalition of private sector, the public sector in the Northern Ireland Housing Executive and ourselves are working to alleviate a small number of homeless people in East Belfast. So we're back to a very similar theme where we collaborate well, then we can make a difference.
You said it a couple of times, Danielle, a year and a bit into looking at these issues and working specifically in these issues. Do you find at this stage you're excited, you're optimistic, you're hopeful? There are days you wake up and look at all the stats and think, I don't know how we're going to deal with this. You know, you're smiling a lot, so I'm encouraged to that degree.
I think it's both. It's both and, isn't it? I think there are days you wake up and you hear the news and you look at the stats and it really is quite depressing, and you just think, how or when are we ever going to tackle this and overcome poverty? How? But then when I meet with people like Brian and the people that we have in our coalition, and I hear of the great work that they're doing, I hear how they're feeding the hungry. But I also hear how they're doing it creatively, how they're being creative, how they're going into their communities, how they're meeting with people, how they're getting alongside people and loving people and creating community and creating a place where people belong and thinking of ways, like they're thinking, how can we join this coalition so that we can come up with creative solutions and share that with government. They're not just thinking about how can we feed the next person, give them the next bag of food, because that's great, but in the long term that's not going to be sustainable. That's not a future that we want to see. But I love the passion that they bring. I love the passion that they bring, the care that they bring for people, the compassion that they feel for their communities, their local people, and that gives me hope. That gives me hope to keep going. Like yesterday we met together in person and that was the first time that we've been together for quite a while. It's normally online. And just being in that room just felt so positive, hopeful that there is something to look forward to. And that's what gives me hope.
Building upon what Daniela said is the idea. Church is quite good at doing things for people. But what I'm seeing increasingly, and building upon the word Danielle used of community, is being with people. And Jesus was very good at being with people and meeting their needs and journeying with them. And I think if we can, as churches, build community whereby those who are most vulnerable feel very comfortable around us, that we're not just seen as people who drop off a trolley of food at the local food bank, but actually we are interested in your whole life and trying to make a difference. So rather than doing it to, being with. And so I do believe the word community is very important as we move forward in Northern Ireland and in our community and churches. Building that sense where people feel very isolated, people feel nobody cares, that I have got to carry all this on my own. Well, in actual fact, if you can sit in and have a bacon bap and a cup of tea and sit around and share your story, that you're not the only one living through it, that there's many others, and getting wee tips from each other. I've watched people with tea comparing notes about how to buy your food on go to one particular store and you'll see a 50p on a particular product. That kind of information is beautiful to share with each other. So, and in the context of a church, whereby one of my frustrations is, why is the church in Northern Ireland so middle class? Why do we drive up in BMWs? And not that I'm against anybody who drives a BMW, but you know my point. Why is the church so affluent? Now, it's important that we are, and from the affluence is given much. We acknowledge that. But equally, for those who are vulnerable, where are they represented in the lives of our church? Again, not doing it to someone, but being with someone.
It's 40-odd years since a former Prime Minister of the UK, and I'm thinking about Margaret Thatcher, said there's no such thing as society. And I don't think anybody in government or anybody engaging with government believes that anymore, do they? Society is just lots of communities, and that's exactly what you two have been talking about.
Yeah. I just feel like when I look around at churches today, that's all that I can see, that they're growing. They're growing these communities. They're part of a local community. Like we see churches, they sit really in the heart of a community, like with schools and with doctor surgeries. And, it's part of that little community. Like you can think of yours and I can think of mine. And churches sit right in the middle of that. And that is what makes up our society. It's that local growing to the bigger.
People think differently now about that whole argument, don't they, Brian? They see the value of community. They see the value of people working together and being a part of something.
Yeah, especially coming out of COVID, where we felt so isolated. We were all in this together. We were all in different boats, were we? I don't know. But now we're freer to move around, and therefore we want to be with other people and share life together.
I'm going to finish like this. You've talked about the conversations you've had with those in a degree of political power, with those in a degree of executive power. In other words, they can get things done. Are we going to see anything change? Or does anything need to be understood or realised in any sphere, politically, locally, personally, individually, whatever, before anything changes? Jesus Christ said, the poor will always be with us. There will always be lonely, vulnerable, poor people. But we are in a time, as we started right at the beginning of this conversation, of a degree of cynicism and despair, widespread. Are we going to see anything change? Perhaps Brian's already answered it. Won't be for the lack of Christians keeping at it, keeping going.
Well, that's exactly what I was just going to say. I think we have to face reality and know that, yes, there are poor people. There probably always will be poor people. But does that mean that we don't bother trying to help, that we don't bother trying to change the society that we live in and the ways that we deal with poverty? I think, again, it won't ever be for the lack of the church trying and reaching out and helping people and getting alongside people, vulnerable people. I think we can see a change, because I think the levels of poverty that we're seeing at the minute are unprecedented. And so we haven't always been at this place, so we need to look again and see, well, what can we change as a whole society? It's going to take big changes, isn't it? But I think we can do it. I think we can do it if we work together collaboratively, and if we use the strengths that, the church will always have something to offer. We don't ever want to get to the stage where we've got no job to do anymore. We want to be involved. We want to be part of it. Again, back to community. Government doing their bit, us doing our bit, any other charities doing their bit. It's going to take everybody.
Do you agree?
Yeah, we're on the cusp of Christmas as we record this. The incarnation of Jesus. Hope to the world. Must always, and it gets me out of my bed every morning, the hope that Jesus brings to him and to her and to them and whatever. So that's it. Joy to the world. The Lord has come.
The thoughts of the Reverend Brian Anderson of East Belfast Mission and Danielle McElhinney of Evangelical Alliance. And Will, I really am gutted I wasn't there. I would love to have met them. It was a great listen, though.
Yeah, it was a really great listen, and we did miss you.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks to Danielle and Brian for giving us so much time and being so helpful.
That's it from the Commissioned Files this time. Thanks so much for listening. We're made at the studios of Commission Christian Radio in Dundonald. Check us out at commissionradio.org.
2024 lies before us, and we'd love you to include us on your journey through the coming year. Do spread the word about this podcast, do encourage others to listen and follow us, and don't forget our sister podcast, Inspired to Act from Thrive Ireland. More details about that at thriveIreland.org.
And we'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.